Let's bring in Mathias Cormann now. He joins us live from Brisbane. Thanks so much for your time, Minister. Labor, from what we've seen so far in reporting of its costings this morning, is promising to have surpluses twice as big as yours, 1% of GDP by 2022-23. Is this the benefit of having higher taxes?
Well, let's just see what the numbers ultimately show. I mean, if the numbers that were leaked to the Financial Review are right, what we can see is that what we've been saying about Labor's high taxing agenda is right. We said that they would impose $387 billion in higher taxes. When you actually read what's being written, Labor, by their own numbers, concede that they've made decisions to increase the tax burden compared to our policy settings by $384 billion, because you can't just exclude the $230 billion in higher taxes, higher personal income taxes compared to our plan from the equation. And of course, what we know is that a higher tax burden will harm the economy, will cost jobs, and will leave all families around Australia worse off. Now, when it comes to this proposition of a higher surplus, well, let's see whether they've included the full cost of their proposal to increase, to get taxpayers to pay for increases in wages for childcare workers. Let's see whether they've included the cost of increasing foreign aid to 0.5% of GNI as they've promised. Let's see whether they've included the cost of increasing the dole, which Bill Shorten has promised. I mean, there's a whole range of spending promises that Bill Shorten has made. Let's see whether they're part of what they are releasing today, or whether they're just hiding things. And the final point I would make is, as Chris Bowen was told by Fran Kelly on Radio National this morning, the economy is not a magic pudding, and it sounds too good to be true. And Chris Bowen confirmed that that's what you get on the Labor government: economics as a magic pudding, and obviously proposals that sound too good to be true. You can't trust Labor. Labor has not delivered a surplus since 1989, and this is just more shiftiness from the Labor Party.
Chris Bowen says it's wrong to be legislating tax cuts for 2022 and 2024 because you don't know what the circumstances are at that time. Hence, they're going to wait to that time to judge whether or not personal tax cuts are appropriate. Isn't that the more responsible way to conduct economic management?
The responsible way to conduct economic management is to set out a long-term plan where a business can see what the framework and the environment is going to be for its investment, where Australians can have a clear idea of the direction that the government is taking. And we have a long-term plan, which includes a plan to provide income tax relief for hard-working families around Australia. It prioritises low and middle-income earners, but it also addresses bracket creep, and it provides the right incentive and reward for effort for all working Australians, because that is the way that you strengthen the economy, that is the way that you create more jobs, that is the way that you ensure that all families around Australia have the opportunity to be better off. Labor, on the other hand, will impose higher taxes, which would make our economy weaker, which will cost jobs, and which will leave families worse off. I mean, look at their track record. That is what Chris Bowen left behind when he was last the Federal Treasurer of Australia, when, of course, he left behind a weakening economy, rising unemployment, and a rapidly deteriorating budget position. This is not the time to turn back to Labor's discredited approach in the past of higher taxes leading to lower growth, fewer jobs and higher unemployment.
We will be keeping a very close eye as to whether the costings do include increase in childcare wages, foreign aid, new start, as you put it, Mathias Cormann. But it sounds like this morning you are standing by that figure of $387 billion as a cost of Labor's policies, even though in that number you've included stage 2 and 3 of the income tax cuts, but Labor doesn't support those.
Yeah, but OK, so that is the whole point. Given Labor doesn't support them, it means that, to that point, taxes under Labor would be $230 billion higher than under us when it comes to personal income tax, which comes on top of the $154 billion in higher taxes on retirees, on housing, on investment, on et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is the whole point. I mean, if you look at the fine print in the article, and it was very shiftily briefed out clearly, if you look at what it actually says is by Labor's own numbers, their own numbers, they are conceding that the tax burden across Australia would be $384 billion higher under a Labor government than under a coalition government. I mean, that's not me saying it, okay? So our assessment was $387 billion. Labor is now conceding that it will be $384 billion.
And according to the ABC, of that figure that you keep citing, it's more than the $77 billion as estimated by the Australia Institute going to income earners upwards of $180,000 per annum in terms of that tax relief. What do you say to that ABC analysis that's been released in the last 24 hours?
Well, it's a complete furphy. I mean, this is a complete destruction. I mean, we've been quite upfront about the fact that our plan, our overall plan, to provide personal income tax relief to hardworking families does provide income tax relief to all hardworking Australians. We are prioritising low and middle income earners, but we are also addressing bracket creep and providing the right incentive and reward for effort for all Australians. But the next point I would make is that somebody on an income of more than $200,000 will continue to be on the 45% top marginal tax rate. There's no change to the top marginal tax rate for anyone above $200,000 in income. And furthermore, there is no shift in income tax burden from high-income earners to low-income earners. That is completely and utterly false. Under our plan, when fully implemented, the top 5% of income earners in Australia will continue to pay a third of all income tax revenue generated in Australia. The top 20% of income tax earners will continue to pay 60%.
It seems odd.
Well, it's very simple, Kieran. But we have given the numbers that are available, given how it's been costed. We've absolutely given that number. I mean, you know, budget measures do not get costed based on individual segments of the Australian community. They get costed based on the fiscal impact of a particular decision. And we've made a decision to reduce, for example, the 32.5% tax bracket down to 30%. And so under our plan, any Australian on an income from $45,000 a year to $200,000 a year will only be subject to, at the highest, 30% income tax on relevant part of their income. Yeah. Now, the cost of that part of the plan is $95 billion, and that is openly and transparently disclosed. But, of course, it delivers a benefit for all Australians with an income. Our plan delivers a benefit for all Australians on an income of above $40,000. And the proportional benefit is actually higher for people on lower incomes. But, I mean, this is just part of the class warfare agenda of Bill Shorten, trying to turn Australian against Australian. What we're saying to the Australian people is that the way to ensure the economy is strong into the future, the way to ensure that we can continue to create more jobs, the way to ensure that all Australians have the best possible opportunity to get ahead is to ensure that we have our tax policy settings right, that we continue to address bracket creep, that we make sure that those Australians who work harder, make an additional effort, get higher wages, do not get penalised by this silent, invisible hit that is bracket creep, which is sort of the silent thief of people's income. We are addressing it because it's the right thing to do by the economy. Bill Shorten is quite happy for people to be hit with ever higher taxes without sort of being upfront about the impact of that.
You were able to detail in the budget papers that high-income earners would save $11,000 a year. Why are you, therefore, then unable to say what that overall burden will be to taxpayers on the highest tax bracket? You're able to give one number but not the other.
Well, because budget measures don't get costed on that basis, and the Labor Party, of course, know this. I mean, budget measures, well, because budget measures are costed on the basis of their fiscal impact, based on the decisions that you're making. But here, this is, I mean, you got to understand, what is it that Labor is trying to suggest here? Labor is dishonestly trying to suggest that the coalition is proposing to shift the income tax burden from high-income earners to low-income earners. That is an absolute lie. That is another Labor lie. The income tax burden on high-income earners will continue to be the same when our plan is fully implemented. The top 20% of income tax earners will continue to pay 60% of income tax generated across Australia. The top 5% of income tax earners will continue to pay a third of the income tax generated in Australia. So this core proposition, which is that somehow we are favouring a fictitious top end of town is a complete and utter lie. Our tax plan, our plan for income tax relief for hardworking Australians prioritises low and middle income earners, but it is also designed to continue to strengthen our economy because we understand that bracket creep harms our economy. We understand that letting bracket creep run rampant is a drag on the economy, costs jobs, leaves Australians worse off. That is something that the Labor Party used to understand, but quite sneakily, quite shiftily, quite dishonestly, they're trying to pretend that this is no longer the case when it is.
Well, you can make that argument, and, you know, it's a valid point that you make in terms of bracket creep, and Bill Shorten's, Chris Bowen have said this before. It's just, I guess, owning the total envelope of your spending. In April, you told David Spears that you would give a dollar figure. That's why we keep asking, because the dollar figure hasn't been provided. In April, you said, I'm happy to provide you with further detail. That's what you said.
And we have provided further detail. You shouldn't just accept Labor verballing. The numbers, of course, that are available and that have been released is the fact that the reduction in the marginal tax rate from 32.5% to 30% comes at a cost of $95 billion over the medium term. And what I should also say, I need to correct you there, this is not government spending. This is government making decisions to leave people with more of their own money. It is a tax cut, not a government expenditure.
It has a fiscal impact.
This is just Labor language to suggest that somehow this is all the government's money and that the government makes sort of a generous decision on how much money they will, how much of the government's money they will let hardworking Australians have. That is not right. People across Australia work hard for their money. The government should only take as much as the government needs to provide the services Australians rely on. Not anymore, and of course that is the point here. Labor doesn't know how to manage money. That is why they're always coming after yours, and that is why any suggestion that somehow after 22, 23, Labor would deliver further personal income tax cuts is just ridiculous. I mean, does anyone really believe that by 22, 23, a Labor government wouldn't have spent all of that money and more and put us back into deficit as they have on every occasion in the past since 1989?
Does anyone really believe that the government is going to be able to slash electricity prices by 25% by 2021 when you haven't done so in the last 6 years?
Well, we have a plan to make it happen. We are committing ourselves to both a... Well, it is a target, as well as an emissions reduction target of 26% by 2030. We are imposing on ourselves an electricity price reduction target of at least 25%. By the end of 2021. And, of course, we've already made decisions, for example, to change the rules to ensure that families and small business can get access to a better, fairer deal from electricity providers. We've already, of course, implemented the price safety net through the market default offer, which comes into effect from 1 July. And we will be rolling out, if we're re-elected, our underwriting investment program into new electricity generation, which is designed to boost the supply of electricity across the national electricity market. And all of these things, and together with a number of other recommendations that were made by the ACCC, will help us achieve our target, our 25% minimum electricity price reduction target by the end of 2021.
You've questioned whether or not, you know, as Laura mentioned, and you've mentioned the childcare workers' increase in wage and other expenditure, whether or not that's in the costings. We'll see it all in full at about 10:30 this morning. But if they are able to get to this point of 1% of GDP surplus by 2022-23, that's going to go down very well with the ratings agencies like Standard & Poor's and so on.
Wayne Swan promised a surplus on 366 occasions. And under Wayne Swan's stewardship and Chris Bowen's stewardship as Treasurer, Labor delivered $240 billion in accumulated deficits. Labor has not delivered a surplus since 1989, and that is despite Wayne Swan promising it on 366 occasions. People cannot trust Labor when it comes to these sorts of costings. They will absolutely overestimate the capacity of delivering the numbers that they're putting forward because they can't manage money. Labor does not know how to manage money.
I just wanted to ask you about this energy price target. Is there anything new in this announcement today, or are you relying on already announced measures that were unable to pass the Senate?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Energy Minister, the Minister for Lower Energy Prices, Angus Taylor, is making a speech today, and he will be setting out our plan to ensure that we reach that 25% electricity price reduction target. And as we said in the lead-up to the election, and as I've said in interviews with you, Laura, I'm pretty sure, we are taking this to the election to get a mandate from the Australian people. And if the Australian people back us in, if the Australian, well, a mandate for our plan for lower prices. For example, as I've indicated, our underwriting of new investment in new electricity generation program, which, of course, if we are elected, will be rolled out. And indeed, we've got, of course, legislation that we introduce into the Parliament, the so-called big stick legislation, which, if we are successful at this election, we will proceed with. I mean, there's a whole range of aspects to our plan to reach that target of a 25% electricity price reduction. But, I mean, importantly, Labor is pursuing a reckless 45% emissions reduction target, which will drive electricity prices up, which will harm families, which will harm pensioners, which will harm businesses around Australia. So, I mean, we have a commitment to an electricity price reduction target of 25% by the end of 2021. Labor will drive electricity prices up and up and up.
But in relation to this target today, there's nothing new in there, is there, except you've set a goal, but the policies don't change?
I will let Angus Taylor go through the detail. What I've said to you today, and this is very important, as well as an emissions reduction target, which under the coalition, as agreed in Paris, is a 26% emissions reduction target by 2030, as agreed in Paris. We also are committing ourselves to an electricity price reduction target. So an emissions reduction target and an electricity price reduction target. Whereas this contrasts with Labor's approach, which has a reckless, excessive, harmful to the economy emissions reduction target of 45%, which would drive electricity prices up and up and up. So lower electricity prices under us, higher electricity prices under Bill Shorten and the Labor Party.
It's fair, you've pointed to Labor's history on achieving surpluses this morning. It's fair to look at your history in the last 6 years and bringing down power prices. It's been negligible, hasn't it, Mathias Cormann?
Well, electricity prices are much lower than they would have been if Labor's carbon tax had remained in place. But there are issues in the electricity market that we're working to address. And indeed, I mean, the ACCC conducted a comprehensive inquiry and made some very sensible and important recommendations which we are committed to implement. And that is what we're saying to the Australian people. I mean, electricity prices are lower, much lower than they would have been if we had not abolished Labor's carbon tax. They're higher than we would like them to be, which is why we have committed ourselves to a 25% electricity reduction target by the end of 2021. And Angus Taylor will continue to set out our plan on how we propose to achieve it, and which is, of course, in contrast with Labor's approach, which will essentially push electricity prices up and up and up on the back of a reckless and irresponsible 45% emissions reduction target, which would harm our economy.